Hello, my darlings. This is Micah, current Micah, a couple of weeks after this episode was recorded. And I just want to tell you I'm sorry for lagging behind. It's been a few days since I meant to upload this episode. It's honestly been I've had a bit of a rough time emotionally the last little bit. It's just what it is. Sometimes it's harder to do things that you found easier before. It is not easy to motivate every week. It takes a lot of time and energy to make the podcast. I do love making it, and I will continue to make it. I appreciate you so much. Enjoy this episode. Hello, my darlings. This is another episode of Ink Medicine. I have a friend here with me today. In fact, I am at her house in East Oakland. This is Leila. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Leila McCabe Williams. My full name.
That's my partner's last name, Williams.
Really?
Yeah.
Nice. It's my partner's last name, too. My actual middle name is Ramadan, so that's a little interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want to get rid of it, so I kept it. So if my full name would be Leila Ramadan McCabe Williams, which is a mouthful. But
how do you identify culturally, ethnically?
So I'm white, Irish, Jewish, Muslim. That's, I think, all of them, hyphenated.
How did you get your name, Leila?
Actually, my father named me. He did not name my sister. His teacher named my sister, so he actually ended up naming me. And it means night in Arabic. And
does he speak Arabic?
He actually is in an Arabic course right now. He moved to Pennsylvania to take this course for like a year. So he is, I would say, almost there. Yeah. But growing up, no. We could read it. We learned how to read it.
For like prayers?
Yeah, we our Sunday school, we would like learn it. So I know the alphabet and I can read it, but I don't know what I'm saying.
Where did you grow up?
Where?
Yeah.
Everywhere. No. I was born in England. Irish. There's the house. You could probably hear that. Mm-hmm. So born in England, moved to New Mexico when I was 5, and then to Oregon, and then California. So we kind of settled in California when I was 14. So I claim it.
As your home?
As my home.
Here in NorCal?
Yeah.
Okay. So you went to high school here?
Yeah. I moved here I was 14, so I started my freshman year. Yeah. Started freshman year.
Who were you in high school?
Who was I?
Yeah.
I was a very loving, free spirit, very hippie, like really into the hippie culture. Mm-hmm. I just loved people. I was like a social butterfly. I loved being around people. I look at it like when I look back now, I'm like, I just didn't have a care, you know? I don't know if I felt as free in the moment. I think I did, but I think looking back, I feel like, wow, I was very like free.
And you're practicing Islam at home?
Yeah, at home. It was always practiced in my house. Mm-hmm. That's like the bedrock of everything. That's it. And I went in, I think starting around the age of 14, I kind of like was exploring other things. And I think around 16, 17, I came back to it and traveled and studied Arabic and did all of that. And then have been in and out, I would say, of practice. Mm-hmm. But I still identify as Muslim.
So when was that? What was that, the 90s?
Yeah. Okay. Well, my age, I was, 96, 97, 98. So like 98.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't it's not, it's like the age thing is kind of irrelevant, but I think it's fascinating the decades in which we come about, right?
Absolutely.
Like the 90s was such a specific time.
Mm-hmm. The 90s were great.
The 90s were great.
I wouldn't have said that in the 90s.
The 90s were great in some ways, for sure. I think, it's like I remember myself in that time, and some parts of it were great and some parts of it sucked.
Some parts did. And also, we're as far from the 60s when we were in the 90s as we are from the 90s today, which trips me out.
Yeah.
Because I remember, just like music-wise, listening to music in the 60s and the 90s and thinking, you know, oh, the past was the best. And I always wanted to be in a different time, if that makes sense. Like I didn't, you know, I always critiqued the time that I was in. And I would say I probably still critique the time I'm in. And of course, looking back, you're like, actually, you can kind of pull forward the joy and the lessons and appreciate it a little bit more. And maybe that's my lesson.
Right, because if you are not unhappy in this particular time, you'll know that in 10, 20 years, you'll be like, oh, when I was 39, that was actually pretty great.
It was great. Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, very true.
So you're 90s as well.
It was...
teenage.
Yeah, I'm a little bit younger than you. I think I came to the States in 96. And then I spent that was my middle school. So middle school, high school, I graduated in 2002, and then went to college from 2002 to 2006.
You went straight to college?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, at 18.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Did you not?
No. I dropped out of high school.
Do you have a college degree?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah. So I dropped out in 98.
Wait, so 98. How does a loving, people-loving, like kind of innocent-sounding, sweet, hippie girl, what happened? Why did you drop out of?
So I was very, very idealistic and arrogant, I would say. A little bit arrogant. But I was influenced by like the lies my teacher told me and books like that. Let me back up a little bit. My father has never been a fan of the United States, and he has never been a fan of schooling here.
He's from elsewhere.
He's from Ireland. Yeah, he's Irish. I know you just went to Ireland, so I want to hear about it. And so his whole thing was Islam. That was it. And if you weren't studying or learning about it or practicing it, it just wasn't as worthwhile to him, right? Like he didn't, like his measurement of success for his kids is not in anything in this world. And so school was never that important to him. Now, my mother was a teacher, so that was a little bit different. But he would always, he would just talk about the schooling system and how it reinforced, systems of oppression. And he's not wrong. He wasn't necessarily wrong. But hearing that as a young child just made me really critique school and always critique what they were teaching. And when I got to high school, I was like, I don't want to learn this. This is not real or not all of it.
So what was most important to him is to make sure you have faith.
Yeah.
How did he think you were going to survive and make money? Or was it like you're a girl, so you get married and...
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I don't want to... That was maybe an undertone because at 15, he was starting to talk to us about marriage. But it was never explicit. Like, he would never say, oh, you shouldn't work. Oh, you should depend on your husband. But I think for him, it was implied a little bit,
Yeah.
So, I mean... I don't think he would have been that happy if I had found someone at 15 necessarily. Now, like 17, 18, he would have been fine. And my sister did get married at 18.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And he was happy about that?
He was okay with it. I mean, it didn't last.
Okay. Because how can it, in this day and age, when you're that young?
Yeah.
There's just so much more information available to us for self-actualization.
Yep.
When did you get your first tattoo? I'm assuming it was kind of around that time. Maybe you dropped out of high school?
A little bit later.
Okay.
So it might have been 21, or was it 18? I can't remember. I was either 18 or 21. I think I was 21.
What was it?
It was the 5 stars on my foot.
Okay.
The one being a nautical star. And then 4 around it. Mm-hmm. It's pretty good. It didn't hurt as bad as I thought it would, and the foot is a really awful place to get tattooed. And I was like, oh, that was easy.
Well, when you're young, things are just less painful. They're just so much less painful.
It's like, well, whatever.
Yeah.
Easy. So I wanted it to be significant, and the number 5, and I've always loved geometric patterns, partly because of Islam and sacred geometry. And so that was me representing 5 represents life. So I got 5 stars. So that's why I got it. And I always thought I'd had to have something really meaningful. Mm-hmm. Whenever I got tattooed, it would have to be this like deep meaning.
So how did you go from being 18, 19, whatever, with like a 1 on your foot to being like...
Covered?
Yeah, covered. You have, let's see, just to describe you for the audience, you have a full sleeve. You have about the equivalent of about a half a sleeve on the other arm, together with a half chest piece. You have a rib piece that I did. You have most of your back tattooed, right?
Yeah.
You have hand tattoos, pretty visible. Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of pretty visible ink.
And all the way down my left leg.
Like a leg sleeve?
Feet. It's the Polynesian. I don't know if we're going to talk about that later, but it's...
Okay, and that's
all the way
pretty
up.
much your whole...
Yeah.
Okay, so you have basically a leg sleeve.
Yeah, I'm heavily tattooed, which is funny because I don't notice it as much anymore.
How was that part of your separation from your family and the culture of your family?
No. I mean, they never liked it. My mother doesn't. I mean, my mom loves me and therefore loves whatever I, would do or do. My dad doesn't say anything anymore, but he's definitely not a huge fan of it. I think, there's different... This is the thing about religion that I'm finding more and more about as I try to figure out my balance and how I want to practice, is that a lot of it is just cultural and it's not actually in the religion, but it's been taken on. So people take it on as part of the religion. And so there's always been this debate whether it's okay to get tattoos or not. And the majority of people in Islam would probably say it's not okay. And now you have more and more information or different takes on it coming out and people saying that it is it's not prohibited. You can get tattoos. And then you find a lot of people in Islamic cultures like Berbers in Morocco that have face tattoos and are tattooed, not like heavily, but it's in their culture. And so, I don't feel like it's necessarily against what I was raised at this point in my life. Looking back, I'd be like, nope, I'm okay with it. I have peace with it.
So tell me about the Polynesian work.
Since I opened up. So your question of like, how did I go from a foot tattoo into
to being a tattooed woman? Really
heavily tattooed?
Yeah.
It was a slower, it was slow and then really fast and then slowed down. And so I was married. My ex-husband worked at a tattoo shop. And so for the time that we were together, that was really like the community that I was around. And I got tattooed often. And then, gifts from my ex-husband would be tattoos, right? So it was just part of our way of life almost.
So was he the artist?
No.
He worked there as a front counter manager.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly. And we would get discounts, because the homies.
Yeah.
I mean, they were great artists, I think. I still think they're nice tattoos. I would change some things, but,
What was so that's interesting, to me, because tattoo culture, there's such different corners of that universe. And it sounds like you were in a boys' shop.
Yeah.
It was like a super testosterone-y boy town.
Yeah.
What was that like for you as a young woman, a beautiful woman, a conscious woman to be in that environment? Because it can be pretty intense.
It's intense.
Yeah.
And I think looking back, I can identify how I felt more so than I could in the moment, just because I've done work and I'm on a healing journey. And so I can look back at moments and now I've had experience getting tattooed by you, which has been healing and helping me, look back at moments where I'm like, okay, that was really inappropriate, or I felt really, not safe, but that was just the culture and you laughed it off kind of thing. And I would put myself in situations that were probably, influenced by being around that kind of shop culture and thinking that it was cool. And so doing some sort of now in my life, I can look back and be like, I would not be okay with a lot of shit that went down, and
were you often the only woman in the space when you were getting tattooed?
No, there was shop girls, you know what I mean? There's this
people
whole
who just hung out around the shop.
Yeah, it's almost like when I look back, there's a whole culture of almost groupies for musicians. So there's that whole vibe, and a lot of my girlfriends that I hung out with were in that group of tattoo
tattoo dude girlfriends,
yeah,
basically.
or
wives.
like hook up with the tattoo artists or hang around or whatever, you know, to, I don't know if it's to have a status or, you know, whatnot. And then there was also, I will say, the shop that, and I don't want to put names out there, but speaking about it, people will probably know
no
what shop it is.
Yeah.
But there was also like a deep culture there, and that was the, you know, Polynesian tattooing. You had a lot of Samoan people, you had a lot of Filipino people, and the folks that were actually artists were really deeply rooted in that. The person, I'll say Orly, and you can probably cut that out later, but who did my leg piece and who did the piece that you covered up, he was trained in traditional tattooing as well, and they have a sister shop in Hawaii, and the owner of that shop is chief of a Tongan tribe, and so there's like real roots and real culture. And I will say that a lot of people that are not from that culture have these tattoos because it became so popular in San Jose. It just like got really big. And so it's almost like I don't know if other people see it, but it's almost like a San Jose thing now because it got so big.
I can see that. I feel like it's different too, because to me, the piece of cultural appropriation that is the most hurtful is when a white person does something that doesn't belong to them and then makes money off of it, right? So if it was a white person tattooing everybody in San Jose with Polynesian designs, that would be a really different situation than this person who actually like was part of the culture. You know, maybe that's just how they are making their living, but it is who they are.
Yeah,
I think that's really different. Yeah.
And the leg piece, because I had relationships, and Orly was never somebody that made me feel uncomfortable in his shop. Orly always and has continued to treat me with respect and love and as, you know, part of the community. And he tattooed me with a little bit of knowledge of who I was as a person. And so was intentional about some of the, you know, designs that he put on my leg. And so I feel a little bit closer to it because of that.
Yeah. Like you were gifted something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's why, like, with my leg, I go back and forth. I was clear I wanted to, like, cover this up. It just felt like too much, you know. I had just gotten too much. And so getting it was really influenced by that shop, you know, and not having a full kind of analysis or understanding of appropriation, about being a white-bodied person, about all of the things that I've been working on for many, many years. I didn't have all of that. Right? I was still in the process of learning. I'm still in the process of learning. And, you know, that's a time of my life that I don't regret it. But I definitely have a different view on it now.
So when you and that husband separated, you, I'm assuming, stopped going to that shop.
No. So so the shop had obviously different people working there. And a few of the artists that I was getting tattooed with actually they opened their own shops. And so I had my tattoos finished after we separated and, you know, split up. I still continued to get tattooed because I was finishing pieces, but it was at a different shop. So there's like 3 different shops that I had gone to. Yeah.
And then between that time and now, did you end up anywhere else?
No.
So what made you, how many years has it been?
Let's see. So I finished this piece after I met Calvin. My markers are my ex-husband and my new husband.
Yeah. And this whole sleeve, this is quite different from the black work, like Polynesian work that you have.
Yeah. And this is 2 different artists.
Okay, yeah.
And they used to be at the same shop, and then they both opened their own shop. And so this piece was not finished, the upper piece. And so I think maybe 2016, 2017, maybe, is when I stopped. And then I hadn't been tattooed until I saw you. And
what made you seek out? I mean, I don't know if you, I'm going to take a picture of you right now because you look nice with the microphone and your arm out.
And my hair
looks great.
Being set right now.
Yeah. So we know each other through Brooks, who is one of the most amazing fitness people I've ever met.
Yeah.
They are the owner of my CrossFit gym, and you're a personal trainer.
Yes.
And their gym is fairly new. So it was about, a year ago last year when things were getting going. Around that time is when Brooks connected us.
Yeah.
So what made you come looking for more ink?
I wanted my son's name tattooed on me, and I was looking for. I actually wanted somebody to tattoo me that was not a male-bodied person, because of the experiences that I had, and because I realized I'd never been tattooed by anybody else. That was it. So that was the original search. And then when Brooks, I was telling Brooks in a session, I was like, looking for a tattoo artist, and they're like, "Oh, do you know Micah?" And it's like, "No." And so they sent me your information, and I checked it out, and immediately was like, yes to your process. It's like, I didn't even really realize that I could have a tattoo artist that was values aligned. It wasn't something that, like, I wasn't seeking that out for sure. And then when it was there, I was like, why haven't I been seeking this out?
I mean, I'm telling you, it's not going to be something that's easy to see, and most people don't put it out there.
Yeah.
So, of course you weren't seeking it out. But yeah, people will often say that to me. Yeah. I didn't know that I wanted this type of experience or connection. Yeah. Yeah. And
then we met first, right? It's like, check it out, see if it vibes. And then I'd also never been tattooed at a shop with just one artist before. So I've never been in a space that felt as safe right? So it really shifted, not just, it was like the entire process of getting tattooed shifted from what it was before. And it wasn't, I haven't had negative experiences. I just had never had that,
Yeah, it's just a really different experience.
It was just completely different.
So the other thing that you're involved with a queer dance festival, right? That was something we talked about a bunch last year as you were gearing up for the festival. Yeah. So I just find it really fascinating that you are in between worlds across the board, and what's the word? Adjacent to the queer community. Like a lot of the people you're working with are queer. I think, you've said that you identify mostly straight, something along those lines. Of course, I think we're all fluid, but I think it's also good to own it and be like, I am mostly, straight or whatever. Great. So you are sort of adjacent to things a lot in your life, right? What does that feel like? What is it like to be adjacent to cultures when you feel very welcome and you aren't a part of them? Yeah.
So I've found myself in predominantly like queer spaces and have felt the most authentic. And so I laugh a little bit because my husband is like, don't gentrify their space. And so it's always like in the back of my mind, how do I show up like as a co-conspirator? Because I don't want to use the term ally, but also in a way where I feel that I can be authentically myself and just feel like I'm contributing to this space and I'm also getting something from this space. And I don't identify as queer, right? And I don't identify as queer because that's just like I think we talked about this as well. Like, I don't fully identify as straight because it is so fluid, but I haven't lived my life as a queer person. And so the impact it's like, I wouldn't claim it because the impact of my life is significantly different. So I just want to be very like conscious and aware of that.
We queer people really appreciate that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I've been, I'm trying to navigate it all, and just even the like queer Muslim spaces. When I was exposed to that, I was like, oh shit, these are my folks. That's just how I feel, and I hadn't had that growing up. Like those spaces weren't really available. So
do you feel like maybe you would have had a different life if those spaces were available in the 90s?
Oh, in the 90s. Yeah, I think so. I think I could have felt a lot more comfortable in my own skin if that was available, and probably would have felt more free to explore, Yeah.
What is it? You have a project, kind of a nonprofit? Yeah. Tell me about that.
So COVID did a lot of things, but it also had some opportunities for me. And in that, I've been in the nonprofit world for a few decades, and I've been a community organizer, working grassroots policy, political campaigns. And I intentionally, and this is a much different and longer conversation, but I made the shift away from organizing, community organizing, into movement building. And that was a really intentional shift for me. And so
Tell me more about the difference there.
Yeah. So movement building, transformative movement building specifically, has this much longer vision and with the goal of like transformation. It has, for me, there's key parts of transformative movement building. So embodiment practices are one of them, bold vision, deep radical connection, and strategic navigation are all parts of movement building. And in organizing, it felt very like you would make adjustments, but you wouldn't transform anything. So there'd be adjustments that you would constantly be making, raising the minimum wage, right? I started that campaign in San Jose. I founded it in 2010 and it shifted. Now there's a fight for 15 and it did a lot of things, but it's still an adjustment because we're still not making enough to live, right? Mm-hmm. And so organizing does a lot to make these adjustments, which we can't ignore and can't, like, they're important and necessary. And it just felt really extractive at one point. It just felt like the relationship part of it is the most crucial. And so that I had identified that relationship building is what this whole shit relies on. And that felt really extractive and organizing to me. And so in movement building spaces, it felt like that's what we were actually doing. We were taking the time to build these really deep, radical connections. It was the long-term goal, kind of, the marathon, if you will. So my husband had been working at an organization that does work in that space for, I think 2015 is when he was hired. So I was involved with some of the work that they were doing and got hired there in 2018. And then we shifted in 2020. 2020, the organization went through a transition. And long story is that I became fiscally sponsored. And so a fiscally sponsored project, basically, I am my own organization, but they do all of the back-end compliance, HR, and like finance for me. So I have the ability to move as my own organization, and they support in that way, like the infrastructure. And so the work it's not mine. I've never, I wouldn't claim it to be mine. And it comes from this long lineage of the work that organization has done. And it's really rooted in a just transition. So how do we transition from a world of violence, domination, and extraction to a world of love, resilience, and regeneration and interdependence? And that inquiry was, there's a deep dive into that inquiry for 6 years. And one of the answers that came from it was you build beloved community. And so now we're taking that theory of change, and we're the Beloved Communities Network, putting it into practice. And we've shifted into, we're network looking, we're still working in that space of just transition and inquiry. And one of the other things that we found is we do through like cultural strategy narrative shift. And so we just launched our graphic novel, and we want to publish people's works. So we're a network of creatives. Okay. And I'm really excited about it.
So I feel like my idea of it was like it was really physical practice oriented, right? But I'm not quite clear. Who is your primary population? Like, who are the people that you're directly helping? Is there a specific thing that unites them, or is it kind of like whoever needs it?
Yeah, so the Beloved Communities Network we support, there's 3 streams of work. So we're not necessarily directly working with like on the front lines. There's organizations that I incubate that are, and we're building capacity and doing leadership development for other folks that are out there on the ground working. Mm-hmm. And so with this new shift into a creative, like the catalyst of a creative network, we will be publishing people's works that are being put out into the world to talk about not just to talk about, but to also shape. That's how we shape our culture, through storytelling, right? Mm-hmm. And so we're making new relationships and new ways of being together, and then we're putting it out into the world.
But how do you like pick and choose like who to publish? For example, are they folks of color? Are they like anybody? How does it?
So we're going to be doing writers' rooms and writers' retreats as well.
Okay.
So people that will sign up right now, we have a network of people.
Like email list, basically.
Yeah, and people that are actually opted into our network that we do work with. So it's not as transactional as just an email list. There's more hands-on of the network. And then there's people, so then I incubate projects as well. I'm an incubated project, which the embodiment thing is. So I think when you were saying, in practice, it's the Joy Labs weight training work that I do is incubated project of the Beloved Communities Network. That gets a little
But so who comes to the classes?
Yeah, so
just who are these people?
Yeah. They come from word of mouth relationship, from different referrals. So different groups I'm in. The Freedom Cleanse has been one of the main places that people have filtered into Joy Labs. And that was started by Malkia David-Cyril, who has been doing work in this space for many, 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 many years, and has recently, not I guess in the last 3+ years, has shifted to understanding grief. So grief as a practice so that we can experience joy. And the Freedom Cleanse was to honor their wife that passed from cancer in 2018.
Okay.
And they started a cleanse because their wife loved to do cleanses. And so to honor her on I believe the 27th of the month, which is the day she passed. And they were like, I do things better in community. I need support. I need some accountability. And so started this group that grew from a handful of people to a few hundred people. And so the last 10 days of every month we practice together.
The last 10 days?
Yeah.
Okay.
And the freedom is, in the cleanse, it sounds like, it's a cleanse. So it's like, do you diet or whatever? And it's like, no, you choose what you cleanse from, like anything that it is holding you back from being free, basically. And so you identify it and you have an accountability buddy, and it's a container that's set up. And I've been offering classes, and that's how Joy Labs kind of started, is in partnership with Mac. Mac founded the Media Justice Alliance. So it's like everything was on Facebook and on social media. So people know about Mac and Alana, like you, that hadn't, experienced them in real life, and just were so invested into this love story, which still continues. It's like the most amazing thing about Mac and Alana is that every Freedom Cleanse, everybody is thanking Alana still. Like, thank you for creating this space. Thank you to Mac and Alana. And so she's still very much with us and celebrated every month. Calvin knew them.
Okay.
I didn't know Alana very well. And in fact, I didn't know Mac that well at that point either. It wasn't until later on that we connected, and Calvin has much deeper relationships with them. Yeah. They shared a lot on social media, like I said, and Alana did make a short video, not video, like a short documentary, which they showed at the celebration of her life. And they just shared like raw videos and emotional videos and, beautiful, conversations and all the pictures and everything. So you followed it. So people would follow the story and you could just see it. And it's reshared. Many people reshare it, and Mac reshares it when memories pop up. And so, like I said, it's just a living, story. And it's something that, we all wish to experience, I think, to have that kind of, not necessarily marriage and love and in that way, but to have that bond with other people. Yeah,
deep love.
Yeah, you feel it.
No, that's an important story to be told over and over again.
Yeah.
Current Micah would like to interject here and say that I heard about Mac and Alana a couple of years ago from a friend of mine, and the story, it shook me. It's an amazing story. It's an intense story. As Leila gives more context and background to it. And something that Max said to Leila when she checked in with them about whether or not to what detail we can go into the story. They said, tell your own story, tell your experience of other people, but don't tell someone else's story for them. I've tried to edit this episode in the way that would respect that sentiment, which I absolutely also wholeheartedly agree with. I would say, I would urge you to go and look up their story and see what you can see of it online. It's a piece of legacy of humanity, and it's a piece of queer history. And if you'd like to know more, go ahead and look it up. I'm going to switch gears a tiny bit.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you a question that might be hard to answer.
Okay.
But I think you're a fascinating human. What do you think is the most interesting thing about you?
My first reaction is I think it's interesting that I was raised Muslim as a white woman. And with my, background and ancestry, it's interesting.
Yeah. Have you done any those ancestry things?
Yeah, I did.
How far back were you able to find your roots?
So my Irish roots, so I've always said I was Irish. I never identified as much with my mom's side. I just didn't know a lot about it. And my father, we're really actually, it's a blessing to be able to track your, roots back. And I have a cousin, a second or third cousin, who is the one that knows all of the stories. Everybody, she's done the entire family tree in Ireland. And so that was pretty much complete already before I did Ancestry. Mm-hmm. And when I did Ancestry, a couple things surprised me. One, I'm more Scottish than Irish because I was like, oh, I'm Irish. I would always say I'm Irish. And then I'm 50% Ashkenazi Jew. Mm-hmm. And I didn't, the story of, being Jewish on my mother's side was always this. Which makes you Jewish. Which makes me Jewish. Has always been an interesting one to navigate for many reasons. One, I was raised Muslim. And so, you are raised with this conflict that is just, interesting. To have that in the background. And then my mother was not raised Jewish. So my grandparents decided not to raise them as any religion. And then they did things like celebrate Christmas, mm-hmm. right? But they weren't Christian. She was raised in the States. She was raised in California, yeah. And so they didn't have any spiritual grounding in what they did. They didn't celebrate Christmas because they were Christian, and they didn't go to church or anything like that. But there was an intention to just kind of wipe out all of religion for my mom. And so she wasn't raised as anything. And then when she became Muslim, my grandparents were very upset. I bet. Yeah. Then it mattered. Yeah. But, and well, so, because us Jews, we don't, for those of us who didn't grow up here in this country, being Jewish is in your blood. So it's not something you have to do. Mm-hmm. It's something you are. Yeah. It's your race. That's how it was told to us in Russia where mm-hmm. I grew up, So I'm sure that they still identified as Jews even if they weren't practicing and did Christmas. Jews, we don't care. We're we'll do whatever. We'll eat pork and we're still Jewish. There's not a set of rules you have to follow to be Jewish. Okay. So that's why I can see that they would mm-hmm. be really upset. Yeah. No, converting out of Judaism is not a thing Jews mm-hmm. like to hear about. Even if they weren't practicing. It's their children. Yeah, because it's not about that. Once you convert, you're not Jewish anymore. But until then, you can do whatever you want. You'll still remain Jewish. Huh. And my grandfather was actually, I think he was the first and only child born here. All of his siblings were born in Russia. Mm-hmm. And then my grandmother is the one that has roots in the States. And for a long time, I think I used to do I didn't even call it spiritual bypass because I didn't even know that was a thing when I was younger. But I used to be my family, my ancestors aren't from this land anyways, not as a flippant kind of thing, but to kind of, and still a lot of that is true that, my ancestry isn't of the United States. I don't have deep ancestors here. And then I did a little bit more digging of my ancestry. And I think my grandmother actually did have a lot of family, and I can't remember when they came over. But my grandfather was the first one born here. So that tracks, you know. And then I did find out just last year during Christmas time, I did find out that I did have family in the Holocaust, and that I had a great Aunt Hetty who got out before, and I think her sister and her mom did die at Auschwitz. And she came over here. I think it must have been my great-grandfather and his two brothers that like sponsored to get her over here. And she must have sold her silver before she came over. And we got this like email in, I don't know, we talked about it over Christmas last year. Of course, Christmas.
Your Jewish Christmas.
My Jewish Christmas. And we got this email saying, we've got silver traced back to you through your Aunt Hetty. And the latest will we can find is from like 1953. And so we're trying to get it back to you. We're trying to get this back to you.
So where is it?
So the last I knew, they were going to send it. So my grandmother, the will was left to my grandmother and then her brother, and her brother's still alive. He must be 96 now, 97. So he would be the one that would get it and decide. And so they had a family meeting, and I think they wanted to see it and then have it put into a museum here.
Like a Jewish museum?
Yeah, in Oregon.
Okay.
So they're Goldsmith. That's their name. That's my...
Goldsmith.
Yeah.
So do you feel any connection to your Jewish side now? You have more information?
I never did, but now I'm interested. Yeah.
Are there any things that you're interested in practicing, like Shabbos or anything like that, like rituals?
No. But I don't even know all of them.
I mean, there's a lot, but there's some basic ones, you know?
Oh, that's interesting. I've been trying to just navigate how to practice the pieces of Islam that I want, but I haven't even thought about that.
Oh, that would be quite the conglomeration. I mean, Shabbos, I think, is so interesting because it's a set time of the week when you are not to do any work, you know, and for those of us, especially who have lives where like maybe you're self-employed, like, you know, we are, and you do things all the time for it. You might be emailing at 11 p.m. and you might be right. So for Shabbos, from sundown on Friday to sundown on Saturday, you are not to do any work, including not play any instruments, because you would be tempted to fix an instrument if it broke. You're not to drive. You're not to buy things, not to spend money. I think that's really an interesting, like, sort of a cleanse, right? A weekly cleanse that...
This sounds really similar to Seventh-day Adventists' practice.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think Shabbos is actually like a common practice in many religions.
That's to completely like rest and to not work and not...
And to be with your family, and, you know, you pre-prep and you don't cook, and you like you fully are present. You can't use your phone. You can't use your computer. You're like fully present. I think it's really interesting.
Friday to Saturday? That's
Sundown to sundown.
Yep. I think we could all use a little bit of that.
We could, yeah. And how could I build that into my life? I don't even know.
I know. Like, but Friday and Saturday is when we turn on.
That's when I work. My longest day is Saturday. Yeah.
I like the idea of like inviting some new and different practices in, though, especially ones like that where, you know, it's a cyclical practice that comes up every week. And just in the work that I'm doing around embodiment and around practice and around transformation and how it has to be, you have to have a practice. You just, you know, have to, and we've forgotten a lot, or I forgot a lot of that, and pushed away a lot of the practices that I was brought up with, because my mom would say, threw the baby out with the bathwater, which is really fucked up saying.
That is a saying.
Well, where did that come from?
I don't know. What about kill two birds with one stone?
I know, that's also...
It's awful.
It's horrible.
In Russian, we say sit with one butt on two chairs.
That's better.
Instead. But I'm like, it's not... You can't sit with one butt on two chairs. It's not impossible. It's just not very comfortable. Yeah, it depends on the size of your butt, too.
Yeah, that's true.
Could
and
be
the size of the chair.
The size of the chair.
But, yeah, I realized there's all these practices that... Just to have a practice that you embody every day or every week or, you know, whatever, every year, there's different, you know, measurements of practices, but to have that is really grounding. And so I'm trying to figure out, like, right now I have a daily practice of working out, you know, that's my embodiment practice. And when I do it intentionally for that purpose, it's really helpful, you know. So I can see.
There's another practice in Judaism that, I don't know, you've probably heard of it, but in the relationship between the husband and wife, right, straight, when the woman's bleeding, the husband's not to touch her from then until, I believe it's like a few days after. Mm-hmm. It's something about 10 days, of a time period. But not to touch even in passing. Like you can't hug, you can't hold hands, you can't, right? And so in some ways, of course, that sounds really fucked up and patriarchal, like women are dirty and this is about that. But in fact, other interpretations of this are that women are closer to God at that point and the man is not to kind of mess with that energy. But then, think about if you aren't allowed to do something for a certain amount of time, how much more desire you might have to be doing it. And building up that tension of like not being able to. So in some ways, I feel like those practices actually keep the fire alive for the people who are practicing those things.
I can see that.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I think somewhere along the different practices, it's been interpreted that women are dirty during that time, and another interpretation, same Islamically as well. I don't think it goes that extreme, but there's definitely parallels with that. Like there's no sex allowed at all Islamically if the woman's bleeding, and that could easily be like, oh, because you're dirty. And I know that's how I internalized it.
Or it's maybe because leave the woman alone.
But
you're always bothering her.
Exactly.
Like leave her alone for this part of the
Let her rest.
Well, also it's like, I don't know, I get really just so, like my body just doesn't feel like it's sore. Same. So, yeah.
Yeah. I kind of want to be left alone.
Right.
Well, if I could just have my own place. Just once a month.
Right. The red hut.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The red hut. And then there's other things that are like, but why can't we enter into places of worship during that time? That's a little bit weird. Like I can understand the other things, but like, why can't I be in a mosque or I don't know, church or whatever? But there's weird things like that you're like,
I don't think that's the thing with synagogues. Well, the women and the men are separate anyway.
Yeah. Same.
Yeah.
Like, can't go in the mosque. Can't touch the Quran. And so those are the things where it's like, okay, that makes me feel like I like something's wrong.
Right. Yeah, no, and I don't know enough to really delve into that conversation from that perspective, but I do know that there's different interpretations and that, I think for Jews, part of it is like, you don't need to do those things because you are already there as a person who's bleeding, you're closer to God. And so that's why you don't get to do those practices with prayer and the Torah directly because you're already there.
You're at that status. Yeah, I think so much has just been so misinterpreted and
by the patriarchy.
By the patriarchy. Yeah. Absolutely. And in some ways, culture has gotten so mixed up with the religion. I don't know if you can even separate them. But, I mean, talking about appropriation, I don't know if we have time, but, we talked a little bit about the Polynesian tattoos as being appropriative. And I, being raised as a Muslim and a white Muslim with roots in, Russia and Ireland, my house was very influenced by West African culture because that's where my parents' sheikh, their teacher, was from. And so I culturally feel like it's like an amalgamation of all these different things that landed in my house. And definitely the West African culture was predominant in a lot of ways. The way we prayed, we would eat on the floor, different art and the dress that we wore. So I grew up when we would go to the mosque or just in general what I was allowed to wear, we'd always put on a scarf and, dress modestly or whatever. And at some point in my teen years when I was really practicing, I started wrapping my scarf because I didn't like wearing it around my neck. And I didn't identify, that was clear that wasn't, who I was. And so I took on more of this kind of West African look and I covered my hair for a really long time. I wore a wrap, or hijab, whatever you want to call it, but I wrapped it in that style.
Was it for that reason? Like you felt like it was private for you and whoever you chose to show your hair to?
I mean, at that point it was, I'm Muslim, so I have to wear a scarf and I'm practicing and that's what we do. I don't know if I, looked at, I had the reasons that made sense to me at that point. And, I don't think it's just, there's a fine line with appropriation and taking on culture. It's just taking on a culture that's not yours. And Islamically, you're supposed to keep your culture. And so I just find this really interesting place where, you know, as a white Muslim, I'm navigating it all the time. And, you know, I have other white friends in Europe and stuff that navigate similar things. And this like cultural appropriation in a way that feels really personal to me, because it's like the culture that I was raised with. And again, to your points, like, you know, how much is okay? We know that there's like a cutoff when, you know, money or some sort of benefit is coming from appropriating a culture where it wouldn't come for that culture, you know?
Right. Yeah.
But because you're, you know, white.
Because you have the white skin privilege,
exactly.
you're able to bring it forth and make that money.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
So, you know, I've experienced both sides of that.
Yeah.
But it's just an interesting I think it's an interesting conversation.
For sure. But also, I think it's really interesting to consider it from, like, you are white, you pass as white in some circles, but probably in other circles you don't pass as fully white. And your name and, you know, your practices and you have a Black husband, you have a Black child.
Yep.
And all those things also sort of complicate our identities from the outside and the inside and the cultures you interact with, right? Like, you're part of his family now. Yep. And so I think it's, you know, it's for sure, you know, it's also somebody who is, as an immigrant, like coming to this country and becoming white through immigration, because Jews are not white in Russia, but we're white here, changing that perspective. And like, I think it's fascinating, you know, and I think that not everybody thinks of themselves that way, but enough of us do, where it would be something to have a conversation about in a circle of people who are really intermixed in different ways and who feel in between worlds. There's not a lot of allowance, I think, in this culture and in our like lefty culture for people to say, sure, I'm white here, but I actually don't feel white because, you know, I wasn't raised white, and how that context changes, you know, or sure, I have thin privilege here, but I didn't when I was a kid because culturally it was different there, you know. The difference, you know, not to like claim certain lacks of privilege for oneself, but to just have that conversation, like, of how complicated an identity can be, especially when you come from another culture that you're not really living in.
Yep. And I think this point in my life, I used to call it being incognito, because I didn't have the language around privilege. I understood it in a way that I knew if I took off my hijab or my scarf, that people would never know I was Muslim. And so I said I could go incognito. And now I know that that's privilege, right? It was like, I didn't have the language as a, you know, child or a teenager. But I knew that I could fit in if I wanted to, physically. And then there's this whole like spiritual bypass, which is something I'm learning more and more about now. Like, oh, I'm Muslim. Not white, I'm Muslim. Like, that's my dad's number one thing, you know? And he'll actually talk a lot about, he left Ireland when he was 18 because of the war. He was, you know, one of probably the biggest things that shaped my father is the war, growing up in Northern Ireland in Portadown, which was like the worst place. And he left for England and was treated, I mean, the Irish there were treated so bad, especially by the cops. And so he will often say, like, you know, as soon as I would speak, I would get the shit kicked out of me, basically. So as soon as they would hear an Irish accent. So he talks a lot about that. In some ways, he'll try to say, understand what it's like to be Black, because I had this experience in England as an Irish person. Yeah. Which, you know. Clearly
not the case.
Not the case. And you can see, like, similarities.
I mean, oppression is oppression, right? And like, when people perceive you a certain way, right? Yeah. And that's a piece that I think a lot of us who have white skin privilege and culturally other have to learn and really own.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of people that became, you know, Muslim, the white community at that time, that became Muslim, really did just, like, that was their way of saying, I'm not white, and I'm not a part of that group. I'm Muslim. This is what we believe in. And that, you know, can I say trumps? But
I guess if you want to, it's still a word.
Is it still a word? But yeah, it's just, to me, it's a fascinating conversation. And too many like white converts do the spiritual bypass in Islam specifically, and probably in other, cultures, but they use that. So that was the most interesting thing I think about me. And it shaped who I am. Like the worldview that I have is shaped because I was raised that way, because I moved around, because I have, my culture is this amalgamation of different cultures. And, I hated it growing up. It was something I hated about myself. And now it's something that I think is the most interesting, and I appreciate it,
It's kind of like back to that conversation we had off camera, or off mic, about as a kid, you don't want to be different, but as an adult, you appreciate your differences. Because those are the things that make you interesting.
Yeah. I have a question, since we were talking about oppression.
Okay.
So for years, I helped teach a poli-sci class, and we did a whole section on oppression. And one of the main midterms that we gave students was to write an oppression paper, right? To identify their, what they've, I guess, felt the most oppressed around. And the definition of oppression is a mistreatment that is systematic, institutionalized, socially condoned to a group, by a group, or an individual acting on behalf of society as a whole, which is a mouthful, but it's basically to say, if there's no power, if there's no structures behind it, it's not oppression, right? There has to be the structures reinforcing it. And somebody wrote a paper on being tattooed as being oppressive, like that they experience oppression through being tattooed. And I was like, no, right? Because it's a choice.
Right.
But then once you're tattooed.
Having tattoos means you can sit still and endure pain, right? Like that's not a skill. That's bad for any kind of job that you can do. But I don't believe that that's a legitimate choice. It's sort of like what people used to say. People would get facial tattoos and then apply for a disability or apply for unemployment.
Right.
People have different abilities, right? I don't think that we're not all made to work a 40-hour week. None of us should really have to.
Right.
Right? This is not the life we should be having.
Yeah.
So to take it that far further than that and say, I've been disabled by this condition that I inflicted upon myself, and so now I can't work. Like, everybody's trying to do what they can in order to have the easiest life they can possibly have.
Right.
So I'm not necessarily against somebody using that angle, but also it shouldn't matter.
And there are also the cultural, and it shifted a lot, right? The culture has shifted so much around tattoos. When I started working at Starbucks in 1998,
you had to cover.
I had not at that point, because I didn't actually have this tattoo. But once I got this tattoo, I had to cover it and take out my piercings. And I've had stretched ears. In fact, I worked at a Starbucks in England when I was traveling there one year because I needed to get a job to pay for the rest of my travels. And they didn't let you wear any jewelry at all. So I had to take out everything, cover all of my tattoos. At that point, I had more. But there's been such a cultural shift, and because it is a choice. And then and then you can look at people that have tattoos that they got in prison and the stigma that's still around that, or facial tattoos. And,
when I was in my 20s out of college here in the Bay Area, I could not get a job to save my life. And I had a work experience because I worked as a high schooler. I worked through college because I went to a school that allowed for work experience while you were in school. So I had an amazing resume. I could not get a job. I had a shaved head. I didn't have that many tattoos then, but I looked really queer. Nobody would give me work. When I went to work for Trader Joe's, I applied, and they basically had us all sit in one room, and then they were like, you hired, you come back for another interview. And they made me come back 3 times for different interviews to talk to different people who are at the head of the Trader Joe's people. I was the only one. I was the one who looked like I did then. So to me, it's sort of sure, it was my choice to not have long hair, but my gender, it would make me feel really claustrophobic if I had to present as a girl.
Right.
Especially at that time when I felt more masculine, and that's how I felt right. But I would get stopped. I'd ride my bike around the city. So that Trader Joe's job that I ended up getting after many interviews started at 5 a.m. So at 4 a.m. I'd be biking from the Mission area, Hayes Valley area, to North Beach. So I'd be biking. There was nobody in the street. I'd get stopped by cops like half the time. And they'd be like, first question I would get, have you ever been arrested in San Francisco? And I'd be like, I'm just going to work. Like, leave me the fuck alone.
Yeah.
You have nothing better to do than stop like children. Like I was 23, you know? So I feel like that's part of the answer though, you know, is like, you can get tattooed and have a hard time getting a job, or you can just look queer and have a hard time getting a job. And now looking queer and tattooed gets you into fun jobs, you know, like had it been now, I could get a really fancy restaurant waiter job that I could not get then. Nobody would hire me. So
times are changing.
It's like identity. It's part of identity.
Yeah.
Whether you look queer or tattooed or what, like I think it's a bigger conversation about, we get to make our choices about how we look. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. I think it's all, it's an interesting conversation. My reaction then and now is still that no, I wouldn't consider it oppressive in the way that I understand oppression and how systems function. And there's a conversation there, definitely, to explore a little bit more. Yeah. But, you know, at this point in my career, I mean, after working for big corporations and going into the nonprofit world, I haven't had as much trouble getting a job, you know? Yeah. And now, obviously, with the work that I do, I don't have any issue. When I was running a field campaign for a mayoral candidate, there were some comments made because we were doing house parties at people's houses that were very wealthy that were supporting the candidate, and I was a little out there, you know, and in some ways it was helpful because it made him a little bit more relevant at that time. So that was the last time I've experienced any kind of work issues with being tattooed. Yeah,
I mean, the culture has shifted and we're more grown now. Yeah. People trust people who are younger less, especially when they, you know, they're like, they see your whatever tattoos and they're like, you made bad choices as a young person. You must not be very smart or whatever the shit is, right? And now it's like, well, I respect you as an adult or something. But I'm glad I don't have to apply for jobs.
Yeah, same. Yeah. Can't work for anyone else.
No, I could not. Like, show up to work, do the things they say, assume whether or not they're treating me a certain way because of how I look or who I am. Yeah.
This is it.
Well, we'll work towards wrapping this up. Okay. My last couple of questions for you are, if you had another lifetime and you had to do different work, how would you fill that lifetime? And if money was no issue?
Ooh, this is like... What would you do if, like, your dream job, if money didn't matter?
Or like not one of your dream jobs. Like, it sounds like you're doing a dream job. I am, yeah. What if you could, like, I don't know, have a flower shop, you know? Just like something not necessarily... What if the world was a perfect place and you didn't have to be an activist and money was no issue?
I mean, so after having my son, I was really interested in, like, being a baby catcher. Like a midwife.
Kind of good midwife, okay.
Like that, I was like, oh... being a midwife or a doula to bring life into this world is like, that's amazing.
It's fascinating too.
Yeah. And so that got on my list of not careers, because I don't want to look at it as a career thing, but just in a way of being, you know, in this world. And what, to me, I was like, wow, what a more impactful way than to welcome life into this world. And then on the flip side of that, death doulas, like, there's the work that scares me the most would probably be that, because I have anxiety around it.
Working with the dying.
And also the, like, critical importance of that, like, being able to hold that. So those are two kind of same coin, different sides.
I love the idea of doing that kind of work.
Yeah. I spoke to someone I was having a conversation with, was also saying we need death doulas for the systems that we're in as well, like the crumbling of these systems.
Like the more abstract kind of death doula.
Exactly, which is a different way to look at it too. Yeah. I was like, oh, just the idea of kind of being okay with the change and the reality of this world.
Ushering out the old.
Yep.
Okay. And then the last question is, what's a small thing that's made you happy lately?
Ooh, coffee makes me happy every day. Like just getting up and having that.
That's great.
My baby boy brings me joy.
That's not a small thing.
That's not a small thing. There was something else that was a really small thing the other day that I was like, this is so joyful. It was this thing, the organizing of my house. Just like being just cleaning.
Yeah.
It brought me a lot of joy when I was just finally organizing stuff. Maybe
I'm looking at some beautiful built-in cabinets right behind Leila, and that's what she's talking about.
Mm-hmm. Storage.
Yeah, storage is great.
Brought me a lot of joy.
For sure. Yeah. Hey, how can people support your work, and how can they find you?
Yeah, you can go to belovedcommunitiesnetwork.org.
And they'll find out what they need to do to support your work there.
Yeah, you can fill out the form that says contact us and write a message, and then I can get back to you. And you can also just see all the different projects and different
like buy
ways
the
to
graphic
support.
novel.
Yeah, so the graphic, our Kickstarter just wrapped up, so it's not available to the public yet, but that's where you'll get information about when it will be available. So.
And if they want to be a part of the Beloved Communities project, they'll find information there.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for being down to have this conversation. I so appreciate you and the work you do in the world.
Same.
Thank you.
Thanks.